Automated Podcast.
Welcome to Automated. I'm your host, Mark Verbenkov, and in this weekly podcast, we will be exploring the impact of emerging technology on jobs, society, as well as us, with business and technology leaders, researchers, and independent professionals across the world. So this is the second part of my conversation with futurist Matthew Griffin. We touch on some really interesting topics linked to the future of work beyond 2030, such as fully autonomous businesses, universal basic income, and how to think about starting to future-proof your organization. But if you want more context as to how exponential technological growth can allow us to arrive at some of these possibilities, please listen to part 1. This is where Matthew lays out some of the megatrends impacting work, as well as the relevant skills that individuals will need for the coming decades. But without any further ado, here's the conclusion of our conversation. So if I can kind of package this together, it sounds like there. First of all, it's very hopeful for the future. There'll be more kind of human to human interaction in the roles that we have, and that this constant learning, new adaptation will enable people to still have jobs in the future. One of the reason I'm saying this is that one of the kind of the main fears that many people have, and this has come up in the podcast several times, is that once AI or autonomous vehicles or enough of these kinds of autonomous technologies come about, it'll make people completely redundant. It'll erase enough jobs that there will be this massive pool of people that won't have an opportunity to feed themselves, to clothe themselves, to attain the amount of money that they need to survive. So to me, it sounds like you're a little bit against the idea of a universal basic income. Is that correct? Or am I misreading?
Not necessarily, but when you have a look at universal basic incomes, for example, no one's really been able to prove that they work. We've had Finland, we've had Canada, we've had the US with Y Combinator. Basically, we've actually had UK and Scotland that have put them in. We've had Germany trial them. Most of the universal basic income schemes, basically, that have included anywhere from between sort of a couple of hundred people to kind of 10 to 20,000 people, have generally concluded that for about 30% of people, it actually had a meaningful difference, because all of a sudden having access to a universal basic income meant that they no longer had to scrimp and save and kind of worry about just how they were going to feed their families. Taking that worry away basically is absolutely important. And this is where, if you want to build people up and if you want to develop economies, the two things that you should invest in is education and healthcare, because those drive everything else. When we have a look at education is one of the very few sort of things that actually has a cross-generational impact. If I'm educated as an individual, then my kids will more than likely be educated and they will get better paid jobs, and their kids basically will get better paid jobs, and it keeps feeding down the chain. But when you have a look at universal basic income, you can kind of argue that it works, but most of the schemes are paying people about 600 euros to about 1100 sort of euros / dollars. And that's not really enough. There's also conversations about how you pay for these things. So, for example, if you have a look at South Korea, as well as California, basically we're doing robot taxes. So if you have one robot that takes one person's job and that person earned 50,000 euros, I'm going to tax them at the national rate. So I'll tax your company for that robot. But robots, for example, improve exponentially over time. So that one robot today can take one human job. But in 5 years' time, it's taking 100 jobs. Are you going to tax it at the same rate? And then, as we become more of a digital economy, as we become more software centric, I can just move my robots to the Bahamas, and tough. Tough if you're Germany, because they've got some nice tax breaks for my robots over there. So when you go and have conversations basically with G20 leaders and finance ministers, and I have lots of these conversations, and they're exciting, as you can tell. UBI basically is something that's always slated as a solution. We haven't really found the model basically that works yet, but we found a promising model. We found ways to pay for it, but companies are fantastic at figuring out ways around having to pay for stuff. You know, I mean, Starbucks in the UK, Amazon in the UK, they paid about $1 million in tax. You know, they're taking in billions in revenues. Come on, you know, you don't think I can move my robots or my AIs basically to a different country, or use a different vehicle. And it's this, when you start having a look at this, Japan, about 2 years ago, the Japanese finance minister actually said, you know, when it comes to the future of jobs, bearing in mind that we see so much automation coming through, you know, different stats say anywhere between 30 to 50% of jobs can be fully automated, and then more jobs can be partially automated. The Japanese finance minister at the time actually said, maybe we should actually stop, rethink capitalism and actually not have capitalism. Maybe we should get rid of money. You know, it's like that Star Trek, the Star Trek vision, you know, where Captain Kirk goes, you know, we don't have money. Everyone works for the benefit of humankind and exploration. And when you actually, that kind of, to me, basically makes actually a lot of sense. But when you go and have a conversation basically with, you know, the World Economic Forum, the leaders at Davos, and say, you know, you're worth $11.5 trillion as a bunch of rich dudes and a couple of rich women, you know, etc. Let's face it, inequality. You know, we're thinking about, you know, fundamentally changing how capitalism works. You know, they'll go, yeah, you know what, it's absolutely needed. And I've seen this at Davos, you know, where they go, absolutely, global inequality, wealth inequality, poverty, you know, automation of jobs and workforce. We absolutely should fix that. And then in the words of, you know, New York Times journalists, Guardian journalists and everything else, they go, they talk a great game, but they do bugger all, you know, when you look at the policies on the ground. And, you know, I suppose basically just sort of throwing this little snippet in there, there was a Rice University recently did a survey across 100 years. And they wanted to see whether or not there was a link to education and earnings, you know, whether there was actually a real link to education and earnings. And they found that over 100 years, everything was in lockstep. If you had a good education, you would earn more. If you didn't have a good education, you'd earn less. And it was for every country, every demographic, rich, poor, every sort of ethnicity. It didn't matter how you looked at the data, there was this massive link between education and earnings. And it's going to be the same in the future. If you are adaptable, if you can see change coming and you're proactive, then you have the right economic system and tax system and government systems in place that allow you to move from one career to another career. So for example, when you look at Singapore with a future skills program, they will say, if you're making an accountant redundant, but you're now moving that person to become a data scientist, we'll give you a tax break. And we'll give you tax breaks as an individual to learn how to become a data scientist. This is where, when we try to solve the future of jobs and work, it's not one thing. You know, I can't just say retrain yourself. You've got to have the right cultural, the right economic systems, the right societal systems in place. Because if you're an accountant, you can imagine an accountant taking a data scientist course, going to Microsoft as a 40, 50-year-old and saying, I'm a data scientist level 101 now. Microsoft will just go, that's great, but we hired a graduate. Awesome on you, though. Good luck somewhere. So this is where, in order for us all to benefit, this stuff's fundamentally got to be rethought. And there are governments that are now starting to do that. But it's like pulling it does, certainly to me, because I'm involved in this, it feels like you're dragging a horse to water, and then you're shoving its head in the water forcibly, trying to get it to actually do something and drink. And we are making progress.
But I would say it's also, it's not just the horses facing the water. You also have people, the vested interests, like the people that you mentioned at Davos, pulling on that horse's reins to get it out of the water, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if you have a look at the vast majority of the world's billionaires, you can quite easily argue that a lot of their wealth is actually built on the back of low-cost labor. Let alone robots and all that kind of stuff. And you can say that's a sort of divisive argument or whatever it happens to be, and you can slice and dice all these arguments any which way you like. But it's generally the fact, increasingly When you have a look at, as I say, I'm sort of writing this trends codex at the minute. And as I'm sort of going through, mega trend statistics, the numbers are insane. They just make your head spin. And as I say, when it comes to this kind of inequality, or basically this societal change that we're increasingly going through, we call it Industry 4, where everybody sort of looks to the future and goes, oh, we're all going to be automated. There will be new jobs coming through. Yeah. So I'll give you a really fast example. So if you step back 5-6 years ago, if I wanted to create a deep fake, I'd have to work for Stanford University. I'd have to be an expert in artificial intelligence and deep learning, typically, maybe a bit of machine learning. I'd generally be paid about $1 to $1.5 million, and you'd need about 5 to 10 people like me to create a really, really bad deep fake. Now I can download a Chinese app like Zhao. I can scan my face with the camera, or even I can just take a selfie, or I can use a photo off Facebook, and I can turn myself into a deep fake, and I can insert myself into a Leonardo DiCaprio movie. You've got platforms like Reface as well. Yep. That doesn't cost me anything, and it doesn't really cost me any of my time, just a photo, and I can embed myself in there. So on the one hand, the reason why I'm telling this story is it kind of overlaps with social media and it overlaps with synthetic content. So the ability to create synthetic content of all forms is becoming simple. It's becoming free. Yeah. It's becoming democratized. The creative industry itself employs 235 million people, and it's worth about $6 trillion of GDP. Recently, a bunch of Russians used an artificial intelligence to design logos for customers, and the customers had no idea it was an AI that was designing the logos, and they loved them, etc. So it's all areas when we talk about synthetic content. But now we're looking for people who can help us create startups, businesses, and different skills, basically, to identify deep fakes.
Right. Right.
So that's where, if you were in the creative industry, I'm saying, we've got stuff to automate you. But on the other hand, you can now become a deepfake analyst, for example. So there are always going to be new jobs coming through. But it comes back to this central part of, as an individual, you've got to be able to adapt, and you've got to be in the right environment and have the right support systems in place to help you move from being a logo artist to a deep fake analyst, right. That kind of stuff.
Right.
And it's not impossible. Some things are difficult, some things are easier, but you've got to have the right societal support structures in place. And again, a lot of that is missing. There's this kind of chasm. In today's world, if you're a logo designer, you'd just be made redundant, and you'd go and try and find another job being a logo designer for a company that doesn't use an AI. Yeah. That's the cycle that we're trying to break.
Yeah, I think that's also why this conversation, which typically turns into a debate, gets so heated, is because, I mean, when you speak about it, it seems relatively easily understood that, just retrain, increase your skills and then move and adapt to a different place. But then, there's a lot of people that say, well, I'm not that kind of person, or most of my friends or my society or my culture doesn't really facilitate that way of thinking.
No, well, absolutely. And so I created a codex, basically, which I call the Future of Education and Training, and it's sort of 2020 to 2070 for that exact purpose. Because when you go, it still drives me nuts, but it was driving me nuts that I'd go and sit down basically with government officials or business leaders, and I'd go, okay, so you see lots of automation coming through. And there's going to be a large number of jobs that you are automating or that will be automated. What's your strategy for helping those people transition, to overcome the challenges and the economic problems maybe that they're going to be faced with when they're made redundant? And the answer was always retraining. It's like, okay, that's great. Okay, so we've got retraining as the stock high-level answer. Retraining in what? And how?
Yeah.
And then you could see the cogs going in all these sort of these stakeholders' minds, and they'd be going, digital technologies. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. What do you mean by that? And oh well, something, and they give you a fuzzy, woolly answer, and then you go, well, okay, we'll forget the details, but how are you going to do it? And they go, well, we're going to put some online courses there, and that's it. And you go, okay, so you think that's going to be effective? Yeah, yeah. And when you get in public, basically these guys go, yeah, absolutely, because we're great at retraining. And you go, no, you're actually rubbish at retraining. Look at your history. When you get these people basically in a sort of quiet room by themselves, they go, retraining doesn't really work, because you need these other systems around. Once you've retrained someone, you need somewhere to put them, etc. And so this sort of a number of years ago, because I've got young children, my young children are already using behavioral artificial intelligence, conversational AI. It's some of the actual leading edge ones are doing that.
Okay.
They're creating their own digital humans.
The neoms, I think they're called, something.
Yeah,
like
you got Neoms with Samsung,
yeah.
and you've got sort of Synthesia, and you've got Soul Machines is a fun one.
Okay.
So they're already doing this stuff. But from my kids' perspective, they're going to live, over the next sort of 50 to 60 years, they are going to be automated the heck out of. I can show you neurosurgeons basically who are being automated, let alone basically someone who's sitting in finance, or an equities trader or whatever it happens to be. So this is sort of where we kind of had to rethink, we're here, society needs to get here. And there wasn't really in fact, there wasn't any blueprint in the middle to get from A to Z. So I kind of put my head together basically and sort of, created this this sort of codex thing. And you can, you can, because people are able to learn, and most people are adaptable.
Yeah.
And most people, furthermore, are actually willing to learn under the right circumstances. As I say, if you're an accountant and you know that your job's going to dead end, as an employee, I say, well, maybe we move you to a different area of accountancy that's not automating, but we've also got these other roles that are now starting to come through that we can see will be relevant in the next 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 years. And so what we do is we put you on a track there. I can teach you the basic premises of most jobs and most tasks, basically within 20 hours, very easily. And then, once you've got that sort of 101 knowledge, getting to 201 and 301 knowledge is a case of, mentorship, tag teaming you, for 10% of your working week, I might put you into that team, or the people who are building whatever it is happens to be. And because we're seeing it early enough, then we transition you. But then with government support, government support comes in and says, well, if you don't make people, even though you can make people redundant, if you don't make them redundant, we'll give you a $3,000 tax break. There's your incentive. There's your kicker.
Right.
It's actually straightforward. And so now, I mean, the kind of upshot of this is, when the Codex came out, I ended up working with all G7 governments because they just picked up on it somehow.
Awesome.
And we are now starting to develop the sort of machinery to kind of move society along. And it's highly political, it's highly bureaucratic. I said there are lots of bottlenecks, and there's lots of people trying to get in the way. But that's politics. So, and there is an artificial intelligence politician coming through, and from China, in their foreign office.
Right.
And maybe I can just deal with him, because apparently AIs are logic based, so they'll see that this is something that we need to do anyway, and rather than quibbling with it.
Well, maybe that's a really good segue into one of the near final questions that I have for you. As the podcast focuses on automation highly, I listened to one of your speeches, and you were talking about fully autonomous businesses, right? So whether it's going to be a politician and a government in the future, I think that there are already some fully automated businesses. And the thing that kind of really piqued my interest was that these can exist even after the founder passes away. Can you touch on that? Because I think that's an absolutely fascinating idea.
So when you have a look at automation, when we have a look at automation, there are a couple of different sort of tenets basically to automation. So you've got automation, which is like robotic process automation. That's sort of your standard stuff. You've got AI automation, and then you've got the difference between automation, where I automate a set of tasks, and create a autonomous system that is able to ingest information, decide what it does for itself, and then go off and do something. So you've got this split between automation and autonomous, and there is a big difference. There's a big reason why you want to know the difference between the two. But when we have a look at automation, speak to anyone basically, and they'll say that the easiest things to automate are repetitive transactional activities. And if you have a look, for example, so when we talk about autonomous companies, some people call them distributed autonomous companies. You can build them on the blockchain, and you can do a variety of different things. Typically, most DAOs are either in the finance sector, kind of Wall Street and particularly Hong Kong, Singapore, those sorts of areas, or in the communications sector. And the reason for that is because most of that stuff is just highly transactional. When you look at Uber, do you really need loads of people within Uber? Because I can have an AI or a system that says Matthew is in this location. It takes GPS data from my phone. I press a button so it knows that I want a cab. And it just goes, Matt's in this location. He wants a cab. Okay, we found a cab. I'll send him a cab. He'll get into the cab. The cab will go to his destination, and then he'll just pay using contactless. Where do you need any human in that transaction-based system? You don't. Which is why then we can sort of kind of easily argue that Uber could become one of the world's most profitable companies almost overnight, because, fully autonomous vehicle, you get rid of the dude in the car, you get rid of the petrol engine, and you replace it with an EV. And then all of a sudden, Uber keeps all the money. In fact, that's why a lot of investors in Uber are actually keep throwing billions into the company, because they see this. Right. Everyone goes, why? They see that when you automate Uber's entire stack, it's a profit machine. So when we talk about fully autonomous companies, as our ability to automate different things improves, so it comes back to that, understand what you're trying to automate, break it down into individual tasks and process flows, then create an algorithm for each step of the journey, and then turn that into a model. There are lots of organizations that are fully automatable. Amazon is another one. Amazon basically has an AI designing the clothes. It then puts a render of those clothes onto the website. You see the clothes on the website, you try them on using augmented reality or whatever you want, or you just like them and you buy them. It then has a bunch of patents for an on-demand manufacturing machine. So it just takes all the fabrics, makes the clothes. You don't need people for that. We even have robots basically that will put 150 million children out of jobs because they're great at sewing. There's another weird fact for you. So I've got an AI making the clothes. It puts a render of those onto the website. Someone buys them. You've got a fully automated manufacturing system that makes the clothes, a fully automated fulfillment system. So that's a robot that kind of just picks up that shirt, puts it into that bucket, and that one's yours. That goes basically into a fully autonomous, logistics vehicle, fully autonomous van that has fully autonomous last mile coverage, which can be anything from like the likes of Boston Dynamics, Spot the Dog robot, to was it Planet's pizza delivery robot? So you could use those kinds of things as a last mile delivery. Amazon will be a fully autonomous company within retail. And JD.com, which is a $50 billion retailer over in China, their CEO a little while ago basically said, I envision that the entire company will be fully autonomous within the next 5 years. You've also got organizations like Hon Hai who make the smartphone. As our ability to train robots to do new things improves, as they become more dexterous, as we can switch them from doing this thing to this thing at increasingly low cost. Hon Hai a little while ago basically talked about developing what they call dark factories. And dark factories will make 1 million of their employees redundant, and they're just fully automated factories. Travis Kalanick, spinning this straight back round to Uber again, or down to Uber again, he's invested in cloud kitchens, and cloud kitchens are a bunch of dark kitchens where you have a robot from a robot called Flippy, which was used by Cali Burger, and this robot will literally replace the fry cook. They flips the burgers and everything else. So now you have fully automated restaurants where robots are able to prepare food items at speed and then shove it basically to a Deliveroo driver or an Uber driver who then delivers them to wherever it happens to be. So it used to be the case, step back about 3 to 4 years ago, and when we talked about autonomous companies, it would generally be hedge funds, finance, a couple of asset managers and communications companies, a bit like social media kind of communications companies. Now you can expand that out. I can show you a way that McDonald's can become fully autonomous. You know, you have robots in the back kitchen making all of the food. Bearing in mind, it's highly repetitive.
Yep.
It's highly standardized. You use your phone to pay. You use an artificial intelligence, and McDonald's are trialing this. You have an artificial intelligence that takes your order at the drive-through. So go and look that one up. Why do I need to hire people for McDonald's? And now, bearing in mind that that's where most people get sort of, you know, one of their first careers, what happens to them?
This guy.
Yeah, then we go back. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So then we go back full circle to, okay, in the future, McDonald's will be a fully autonomous company. You know, you can no longer go to McDonald's to get a job. Do you go to KFC? KFC are kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So now what do you do? And then we get back to, you've got to be adaptable. You've got to get an education. And you're now maybe becoming that deep fake analyst.
I'm really happy that you brought up the McDonald's example, because yeah, as I pointed to, that was my first job when I was 16 or so. I worked for a summer at McDonald's, and I've always wondered why McDonald's was never fully, or at least highly automated, because it's a very repetitive type of activity that you do.
Yeah. And it's and literally, as you're probably guessing, we can keep going.
Exactly. Well, I mean, maybe with that, I do see that we are far over time. I think maybe the final question that I have for you, as I'm also digesting everything that you've been saying, is we've kind of identified how individuals can future-proof themselves.
Yeah.
Right. It's obviously learning more, being adaptable, having these courses, etc. How can companies, and I know that this is kind of a large thing that you do within your institute, maybe you can give just a sneak peek as to how organizations can start to future-proof themselves. Obviously, going to yourself and to the 311 Institute, but is there a way that they can start thinking about this before actually engaging with somebody that can help them through the process?
Yeah. So the absolute first thing to do basically is go out and explore, get a point of view, but also get out of your own industry. So I was famously say, in my keynotes, if you go and ask a retailer, what do they do? What industry are they in? They'll go retail, stupid. If you go and ask a bank, or a financial services organization, what industry they're in, they'll go, we're in savings and investments, stupid. And you can do that with the automotive industry. I'm in the providing mobility as a service or selling cars business, stupid. You go and ask a technology company, basically like the fat bags, like the Facebooks, the Alibabas, the Amazons, the Googles, all that sort of stuff. And you say, what industry are you in? And they will go, all of them. So on the one hand, the fact that all these different industries are being digitized means that the individual boundaries and borders between them all that used to keep them distinctly separate is actually being eroded. Same for the energy industry, it's construction industry, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Agriculture industry, that's a whole same conversation.
Yeah.
So from a business perspective, get out of your comfort zone, explore your industry and other industries, figure out what timeline you're interested in. Bearing in mind, everything's accelerated. If you're interested in the next 10 years, because everything's accelerated, that's more like 7 years. 5 years is more like 2 to 3. So don't think linearly, expand your horizon to about 15 years. That's probably a kind of safe place. Okay. Go and have conversations with people, go and get people within your business to figure out how, if they were starting from scratch, how would they disrupt you? Really uncomfortable conversations with pretty much every organization, but I can show you how every industry is being disrupted from the inside out. This is where startups are great, because typically the people who disrupt you don't work in your industry. They work outside of your industry and they've got nothing to lose when your industry goes splat, or the way that your way of working or product development goes splat. So get that, get out there, explore, get a point of view, bring it back home, figure out what that means to you and your particular business. Figure out what it means basically to your vision and your horizon planning strategies, change those, and then go and start doing something. And what I mean by doing something is, if you've identified something that is potentially disruptive to your industry, go and start working with an ecosystem, work with accelerators, work with startup communities, create some entrepreneurs basically within your business. And you don't have to put a lot of money around this, but you can get, if you think that your industry is going to be disrupted by, for example, 3D printing robots that are printing buildings, put aside a $50,000 prize fund, and go and run a competition for startups who help you solve the problem of 3D printing a building at speed. You've now managed to ride that disruptive wave, and rather than having to spend $10 million yourself developing the technology, you spent $50,000 and you can buy a 20% equity stake in a startup. And there you go. You're now at the forefront of disrupting your own industry. And this is the thing. It's not rocket science. It's sort of fairly straightforward, but actually the number of times where you sort of have to sit down with people and say, this is what you do. And then they kind of go, oh yeah. Because most people don't give themselves the time to think. Again, when I'm sort of doing my keynotes, you ask an audience, how many of you take one day out of your business to really think about the future, the near future, let alone the far future, and the opportunities and threats that lie therein? You might get 3% of people going, me, and it's not an 8-hour day. They'll do it for a couple of hours. Most people live in their status quo, and you've got to get out of your bubble. You've got to get out your comfort zone, and you've got to make the time. If you don't make the time, you're going to get steamrolled by something. And then if you want to know what you're going to get steamrolled by, look me up and I'll tell you what you're being steamrolled by. And then I can sell your shares.
Perfect. Matt, I can't thank you enough for coming on. It's been one of the most enjoyable conversations. A ton of information. I'll have to listen to this episode a couple times myself. Where can people find you? I'll have the website on the show notes, LinkedIn. Is there any other way that you want people to look you up?
So if you go to the website, so www.311institute.com, there's loads of freebies, because one of the things I try to do is obviously show people the future, but also democratize access to it so you can figure it out for yourselves. You don't always have to come to me. But if you want to find me, thanks to lockdown, I'm in exactly the same place I was a year ago. I'm hoping to sort that one out. But go to 311institute.com. I've got YouTube channels. If you want to go and have a look at my keynotes, then you never need to actually speak to me ever. You can just go through the keynotes and you sort of get a lot of these principles basically through that. And I've got codexes and reports which are free. So again, on the website, just go to the resource section, and you want to go and have a mooch about 250 exponential technologies and what they mean to you and your industry and stuff. It's all there. Great bedtime reading if you're an insomniac.
Awesome. And as somebody who has looked through the website a bit, there is a ton of information on there. So great that you've made that available.
Thank you. I need an AI to organize it all for me.
Yeah, of course. Great. Well, thanks a lot, Matt. It's been great.
Well, thanks, Mark. Likewise. That's it. And thanks to everyone listening as well. And it's been great having a chat.
Terrific. Thanks. Well, that's it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast and the conversations here, the best way to do this is to go onto Apple Podcasts and leave a review, as it helps the algorithm to reach out to new listeners and brings the show to them. Also, feel free to check out the website, automatedpodcast.org, where you can find the show notes for each episode, written articles on the themes of the podcast, and a library of resources on the topic of emerging tech and automation. Also, if you want to reach out and leave any feedback, or you have any questions about the podcast or any of the conversations, there are general contact links such as email, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. for you there on the website. And finally, for those of you that want more than just an audio conversation, the video recordings are now going to be up on YouTube for the newer conversations, so feel free to check out the videos by searching for Automated Podcast on YouTube, where of course you can like and subscribe if you prefer to support the podcast that way.
the Automated Podcast.